Welcome back to the RightWave audio community. My name is John, and for this video, we are going to continue the calibration of our Rythmik Audio F18 subwoofers using Room Equalization Wizard, REW. This time, we're going to be setting the timings by adjusting the distance setting in our processor, as well as setting the levels based on the feedback we're getting from REW. Now, if you're just coming into the series, we do have several videos. The first one we did was just setting up the REW software with the UMIC 1 microphone and the other tools that we have acquired and getting the right prerequisites into your computer, etc. So check that one out. We also have a video that was really just about getting rid of the background noise before you do any of this calibration. And then we got into some of the calibration, starting first with our video on placement, and then the video on setting the crossovers was done last week. So here we are, and we're at the next stage, setting the delays and levels, and we're going to be following this up with equalization. So let's get into this at this point. I do want to make a point too. In the last video, we set the LFE, low frequency effects, high cutoff at the standard 120 Hertz, which was the guidance for the day. Reviewing the video by Audioholics with Anthony Germani on how to do these bass optimizations or calibrations, a better word for it. Anthony was recommending just setting the LFE high cutoff at 80 Hertz because that's how movies are mixed. I think ultimately it's going to come down to the way what we feel sounds better in the room. But I'll keep that in mind. I may be adjusting that high cutoff, trying it at 80 Hertz to see from a listening point of view if that improves things. But we're going to keep it at 120 Hertz in the meantime. But that's good guidance for somebody with a lot of experience. So I'll give that a try in the future. So back to our measurements here. So we've done these initial measurements at 7 feet. Now 7 feet is the distance between the subwoofers. Actually, the way it's turned out in our placement, about 1/4 into the room and 3/4 back for the second one. It turns out to be both are around 7 feet from the main listening position. That's what we have the processor set to by default. So now we're going to see if moving it a foot closer in the settings, which is going to add delay, or a foot back from 7 feet to 8 feet, 9 feet, etc., which will reduce the delay, how that impacts these responses. Do we get an improvement by adjusting the delay? So at first, we're going to try it a little closer, adding more delay. So go from 7 feet to, let's say, 6 feet. And I think what we'll do here, just for expediency, is just at first do the main listening position, find out what setting seems to be best, which timing, which distance is best at the main listening position, just to make this quick. Of course, I'll come back later on and do a more in-depth tuning, but this will give you a sense. So this is the 3-foot measurement compared to not much different, actually maybe a little better than the previous one. Let's compare that with, what did I think was better? 6 feet or 5 feet. So 5 feet is this one. I think I'm just going to be more comfortable doing this another way. We're going to hit pause on all this. I am back and wearing a new shirt because I wanted to take some time. I wasn't seeing the results that I thought I should. In fact, when I went back to confirm the subwoofer at the back of the room, I noticed that one of the cables was loose. It wasn't even running. So that signified that I needed to redo some measurements with the correct connections. But I also wanted to really think through my test plan. And this is what's important is really be methodically going through your plan. And if you're not seeing any results change, you want to really make sure that you're doing the test right and that you're thinking about this. Now, uh, when I go through the data here that I was initially capturing and what I was doing, and if I can look at this, I've got a lot of captures in this file here. You know, I was trying from the main listening position distances with both subs going, and not the front speakers. And I was trying this at, let's say, 3 feet, and then I was doing it again at 7-foot distance, and then again at 11 feet. And I really wasn't seeing much difference. I even looked at it at 8 feet. So just trying at different things. Then I turned on the front speakers and I saw some improvement there. But it really wasn't seeming to be adjusting when I was making these changes from the processor. It didn't have a lot of impact. So I said, okay, maybe the problem is that when I'm setting the delays with the processor, this processor only has a single subwoofer output. Now there's 2 connections in the back of the processor, but they're run in parallel. So we're getting the exact same signal, same delays to each subwoofer. If I then change the wiring on the subwoofer, instead of going into the LFE input, going into the line in, and these Rythmik F18s come with a little sheet that explains everything here. If you have a different model subwoofer from a different brand, they have different characteristics. But this one, if you bring your input onto line in, then you have the ability to adjust the delay from the subwoofer and thereby adjusting the delays independently. And so I was going to redo this with independent delays, and I did notice some difference. Before I show you that, I do want to point out, and I'm going to clear this up so you can see this difference here. Just playing around with different settings on the processor, and you can see here this particular trace is, I believe this is just using a 120 LFE cutoff, but if we move that up to 200, does that make a difference? And it does. That we get a little more subwoofer output back here. If we take a look, and now we're going to lower the crossover point. If you remember from the prior video, we set it at 90 versus 70. If we were to change the crossover point for the front speakers from 90 to 70, and you see some changes, but not a lot. The other thing I played with was bringing down that LFE cutoff to a different point. Not a lot of changes there. So I think I tried a lot of different things here. But with Trace 10 here, what I started to do was experiment. Let's center this a little bit. So first thing what I did is leaving both subs at the same volume, leaving the processor set to 90 hertz on the front speaker cutoff, but not having the front speakers on, setting the LFE cutoff at 120. I then took sub 1, which is in the front room here, and I changed the delay to 0 degrees and the sub 2 to 0 degrees, which is actually what we had before. So this is the trace at normal with no delays. We still got the 7-foot setting from the processor, not a big problem. So this is kind of our baseline, what we were doing before. Then in trace 11 here, I began to play around with things. So I counted the notches on the phase delay, and they just have a position mark 0 and 180 degrees. The minimum setting is 0, the maximum is 180. They also labeled that the maximum is a 16 millisecond delay. Well, I counted the notches. These are notched when you move the dial. There's 40 positions. So if you divide this up, if you go 20 notches, you're halfway. And so that's a 90-degree out of phase delay, or that would be 8. Dividing that 16 milliseconds by 2 would give you 8 milliseconds. So I figured out every time I moved that 5 notches, I was moving 22.5 degrees or 2 milliseconds of phase delay. So this trace 11, and we compare this to no delay. So now the front sub will be 2 milliseconds delayed from the back sub. Let's take a look at what that does. Now we're starting to see some differences. We're actually getting an improvement below 10 hertz, which is nice. We probably won't hear much of that, but this is starting to get noticeable. So I'll take away 10 because I think 11 is better at 22.5 degrees or 2 milliseconds. Now let's try doing another 2 milliseconds. So it would be a 4 millisecond delay at 45 degrees. And comparing that off, I don't think that is quite as good. Let's take a look, moving in a further 5 notches. This gives me a 6 millisecond delay. So it's 6 millisecond delays. There's some improvements around 40, 50, but not a lot. It does start to drop off there around 200, a lot more. And let's take a look at trace 14. This is 90 degrees. And we're starting to get some weirdness at 90 degrees. I don't like that. This big dip here, although that's below 10. So this one here is a 8 millisecond delay, 90 degrees phase. I don't like this drip here, but of course that's below 10 hertz. Not terrible, but I see some other weirdness around 140. I don't know if that will smooth out when you put the main speakers on, but the other is better. So we'll ignore that one. Next one is 10 millisecond or 112.5 degrees phase. Oh, I'm going to turn that on for you. And again, we're not doing too good above 90 hertz here. Not as good. Let's take a look at the next trace here. This one here is 12 milliseconds at 135. Again, maybe not as good. Let's look at the next one. Not too bad, but there's a little dip there at 140, as I'm seeing here. And it's 12. Let's take a look at 14. 14 is not so bad. I would say not too bad there. Let's take a look at a full 180 degree. Let's see, is this one? Yeah, 16 seconds, full 180 degree. Let's see. Maybe not quite as good. Again, at 145, there's a little dip here. A little stronger at the lower end, but it does drop off around 200 a little more. I kind of like these two the best. At this point, I'd want to listen to each to see which one was really better, whether I could actually hear the difference. But these both look pretty smooth. And so what we've got here is this trace 16, which was 12 millisecond delay or 135 degrees, as well as 11, which was 2 milliseconds at 22. So a little bit more than 0 and a little bit less than 180. And those were the best. Now at this point, I switched over from doing the phasing, and at this point I was going to play around with volume, and realizing that we'd run into the same problem if we're trying to do the same level out from the same output to both. We really want to look at this independently. So what we'll do here is we're going to clear our data here, and we'll reload what we have for volume. And all these traces, let me turn these off. Apparently there's a nice clean way to have these come in. I'll have to learn how to do that where we don't have all these just turn on automatically. Let me just turn them all off. Okay. So at this point, let's look at the first one here. And in this case, we're setting the volume of sub 1 to 0 and the volume of sub 2 to 20. We're doing the 14 millisecond delay on sub 1. And let's see, so this is the trace here at 0 on 1, but 20, now I say 20, those are 20 clicks. I don't know what they equate to. They don't really give a scale. It's just 0 to full. And so there's 20 clicks, which is at the 12 o'clock position. And let's compare, we're going to gradually move the volume up on sub 1. So this next one here is moving volume 1 up. This is interesting. Not only do we get a little bump here, but now we start to get this dip. And this was said in some of the other videos I've watched, that you can get some weirdness where you think you're raising doesn't always equate to always adding in all areas. So it may affect negatively in some cases, and here it does. So we don't like the 5 notches. Let's look at 10 notches. Well, this is better. Better at the beginning, but then we get this weird dip at 100. So interesting. Let's take a look and compare the next setting up. This is setting the volume to 15 notches. And maybe just here is 10 and 15. Not quite as bad at 100, but not quite as good below 10. But I'd rather fix the problem at 100. Let's look at the next one up. And let's keep that one because that was a little better. Here we're taking a look at with the volume setting of 20 and 20. So this is exactly what we had before. That actually looks better, except until you get up to around 200, which may not be a concern. Let's try the next setting up. This is setting volume to 25, so a little louder now. Actually, keep that one. So this is 20 versus 25. Actually got less. So that's unusual that here we're raising it up. And I think I did it one more time, although I was really, I didn't feel comfortable putting the volume up this loud. This actually did increase, but I've got some now funkiness here, and particularly here around 140, not as good. I did, you know, with all this done, settings of 20 and 20 look better. So at this point, I went to the back of the room and reversed the sequence. Left the front at 20, and let's see what happens when we set the rear to 0. So this is number 8. And let's get rid of that. So here for the meantime, but I'll remember 5 was the best when we played with sub 1. So sub 2, setting 2 to 0 front and 1 to 20, we get this response. Now if we start to raise the rear sub up, here is raising it up to 5, you know, a little, it's close. Here is raising it up to 10. Here is raising it up to 15. So it's not as, it's a little bit better there. And then raising it up to 20. Oh, I kind of like, well, there's 20 again. So, you know, that 20 isn't bad once again. So that is traced. I'll just make double checking. Yep. Setting them both to the same volume, again, is looking pretty good. Let's compare it to setting the rear to a little bit louder. But now, again, I'm starting to get this dip here, and a little bit worse here. So I almost like 20 and 20 better. So the next thing I did, said, well, how does 20 and 20 in the volume, with the 14 millisecond delay on the front one, how does that act when you start to add in the front speakers? So let's put on the front speakers and see what happens here. It's interesting, it dips out a little bit more below 5 hertz, but we don't really care. But it is, now when you get past the crossover point of 90 hertz, it starts to do better. And I think, what was this last trace before we close off here? This was 15, and 15 was what? What was the difference here? Aha. Yes, what I try to do here with this last one is, and let's just compare, these are with both subs and both front speakers going. 14, this trace, is with the processor at normal phase. And 15 is if we invert the polarity, the phase on the processor, but still leave this at 14 milliseconds. So we just flip the front speakers versus the subs. Not a great difference, but I do like the normal better. I think I like the normal better. Very, very subtle difference there. So that wraps up the phasing and the volume settings. I definitely now a proponent of independent adjustments. You know, the newer processors, which will do independent control of dual subwoofer outputs, that is a plus. If you don't have that in your processor, you probably want to make sure your subs have that granular, not just an invert, but to be able to go variable between 0 and 180 degrees to really dial it in. It was really important in this case to get that setting ideal here. So the next step is going to be in the next video, where we actually start to do the parametric EQ, or EQ in general, to see if we can smooth this out even further. At this point, I'd like to hear from you. What techniques you use to get the phasing correct, set the volume correct. Do you think I'm doing it correctly? You know, I'm learning. As you probably noticed, we're doing these videos in real time for the most part. You're seeing it as I'm learning how to do this. You know, I don't have a lot of experience. I've been watching videos. I've got the tools, and I'm seeing some success. So I think this should not be something you're afraid of. I think you should, with a little bit of investment of a calibration microphone and the free REW software, you can do some of this stuff manually. You don't need Dirac or Odyssey or whatever. We'll check that out later on to see if we can get even better with those tools. But we're showing in this series how you can do it manually at lower cost. If you like this video, like and subscribe to this RightWave Audio community. And be sure to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when the next video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.